Hello, and welcome to today's SSP webinar, Print on Demand, the first in our series for 2014. We're very pleased that you can join us today. I'm Gerald Lillian, CEO at Allen Press, and your organizer for SSP's webinar program. We're kicking off the 2014 webinar program with a more in-depth examination of the many variants of the Print on Demand solution, a topic of exploration that was requested by you all, attendees from last year after the 2013 Eliminating Print or Putting Print in its Proper Place webinar. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items to cover. Your phone is automatically muted in consideration of our presenters and your fellow webinar participants. Please use the text chat feature set to organizers and panelists only to send in questions or notify us that you are having technical difficulties. Also, when sending questions, please specify to which presenter you would like your question directed. Questions can be sent at any time, but they will be compiled and presented to the panelists by our moderator once all prepared presentations are completed. At the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll receive a webinar evaluation via email. We encourage you to provide feedback so we can continually improve the SSP webinar program. You will also receive a link via email to the recorded broadcast of this webinar, including all the slides that are going to be presented. Our moderator today is Tim Cross. Tim is a marketing product manager at Allen Press, responsible for print and content management services solutions. Tim is also president-elect of the Council of Science Editors. It's now my pleasure to turn the webinar over to Tim so he can introduce our panel and get us underway. Tim?
Thank you, Gerald, and welcome everyone. Before I hand things over to our first speaker, I'd like to give you a little setup for today's webinar. The topic we're covering, Print on Demand, or POD, as Gerald mentioned, is a sequel, or maybe it's more like a spin-off from the SSP webinar in September called Eliminating Print, Really. If any of you saw the webinar, you might remember that the word really in the title was followed by a question mark and an exclamation mark, as in really or really. I think that kind of makes the point that some publishers still have unresolved questions related to going digital only with their publication, and for others it's really a no-brainer. So the webinar in September presented 3 case studies that illustrated why and how publishers are eliminating print, and 1 case study also touched on changing print models and the concept of print on demand. So that's really the genesis of today's webinar. So it makes sense, before we dig into POD further, to step back briefly and recapture some of the ideas around eliminating print from the earlier webinar. Don't worry, you're not in the wrong webinar. It's just kind of like getting back in the classroom after summer vacation. So our first presenter will explore how print continues to be a viable option for some publishers, and how POD offers a cost-effective solution to make this happen. And following an explanation of how and why POD can make this happen, we'll see how it's being worked out in the real world by a commercial publisher and a society publisher. Our first presenter this morning is Paul Lucas. Paul is a digital printing industry veteran with over 20 years of experience helping publishers leverage their data and graphic assets to reduce costs while optimizing their print, online, and mobile communications. He's currently the Vice President of Sirin Corporation.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for that introduction, Tim. You know, Sirin is involved heavily in optimizing content distribution for all of our clients. And the interesting thing about us is that we're kind of agnostic, because we do it, you know, both in print and via other mediums as well, digital. But contrary to what has been popular opinion, what we've observed in the marketplace, at least for ourselves, is that the print side of the business has certainly been one of the fastest growing segments. And so we began asking ourselves this very same question: why do we still print journals? Because we saw it as a very positive thing and wanted to understand it more deeply. What were the drivers in the marketplace that are really supporting this? And absolutely, the marketplace has changed. The dynamics have changed. This is not what it used to be. But what we discovered is that it's a genuinely vibrant and viable and sustainable segment that is really worth our time and attention as a group and as an industry. Sort of an interesting current event that I think really underscores this is, you know, a year and a half ago, Newsweek famously announced that it was no longer going to be published in print. And then last Friday, it hit the newsstands again in print edition. And it was interesting because it had been taken under the umbrella of a very well-entrenched digital-only media company. So why did this media company suddenly do a 180-degree turn and suddenly decide that they needed print too, even though it wasn't really even their core business? And it turned out that it was their readers who were encouraging IBT Media to bring it back into print. They'd heard all kinds of stories about how that wasn't possible, but as you see there from the quote from one of the founders of IBT Media, they realized that it did have a definite niche and a value place in the market, and by not having print, they were missing. They were missing out on that entire segment. In his own words, he referred to it, it's a luxury product, which I think from a marketing standpoint is a very, very good way to look at print. When you have a value-added product and there's consumers in the marketplace that desire it and are willing to pay for it, even if they're no longer the majority of your customers, it's still a viable channel and media to pursue. So where did IBT get its inspiration? Well, I did a little bit of reading, and it turned out that they were looking at the Economist Group with for their inspiration. And I found this interesting quote here from Susan Clark, Managing Director of the digital business at The Economist. And if any of you have had a chance to look at The Economist's results in recent years, every year this is a publishing organization that has grown substantially year over year for the last decade. And I think part of it is that they've adopted this mentality that what they're really promoting to their subscribers is The Economist as a brand and the content of that. And they're fairly agnostic as to whether people are consuming it in print or digital. Their mindset has become much more, we're going to deliver this content in the format that the subscribers want to consume it. And that has really paid off for them. And in part was the inspiration for what we saw happen with Newsweek as well. So now let's take a look at some of the more common publishers that we look at in the scholarly publishing space, above and beyond The Economist. And all these reports are, information is publicly available. But what you see is that even though print is definitely no longer the majority of the business for these publishers, it's still a fairly substantial chunk of it. And over the last few years where people debate whether they should eliminate print or not, personally, if I was in one of these organizations and I had to go to my CFO and tell them, hey, we've decided to eliminate a product that represents between 20 and 30% of our revenue, I don't think there's any CFO in the country that would take that news well. So yes, it's declined, but it's a significant piece and a large enough piece that we really just cannot ignore. In a recent interview, Stephen Smith, the CEO and president of Wiley, put it this way, where he indicated that to the extent that a legacy business remains profitable and yields positive cash flow, Wiley plans to continue to support it. And the rationale is because by providing that product line and supporting it, it also provides important financial support for the Wiley organization that they can then use to fund their future innovations. So what does it mean in terms of revenue to these publishers? Well, looking at the industry overall for the journal's business in scholarly publishing, 20 to 30% of publishers' worldwide revenues translates to about $1.8 to $2.8 billion. And I think not only is that a significant amount of money, but if you think about it in a capitalist world where consumers are really voting for products with their dollars, here's a substantial number of votes from subscribers saying that they want print and they want to continue it and they're willing to support it. They're willing to pay for it. So to me, this is another indicator behind the rationale for why print continues. People want it and they're willing to pay for it is the message here. So then we dug a little bit deeper into this. So, okay, we can see why the publishing industry wants to continue to supply it. Sure, if you've got customers that want it, supply the product. But what are the reasons the readers themselves, the subscribers themselves, are continuing to buy print? Among those who do, what are their rationales? And the notion that always makes me cringe is when sometimes you hear people suggest that people who buy print are in some way technophobic or stuck in their ways and don't want to move on. But as we dug into this, one of the most interesting commentaries I received from somebody in the scholarly publishing space was that STM journals are being sold and consumed by scientists and technology, the people who are behind the innovations of modern technologies. So almost by definition, these people are not technophobic. They're in fact the inventors of the technology. So if you've had this population of people who are certainly not technophobic and yet consuming print anyway, it must be because they really want the print. And what are the reasons? Well, some of the reasons that we found was that they talk about it delivering a better reader experience. And digging a little deeper into the science and technology space, one of the areas that they talked about it is, in the lab, the ability to take a printed journal and open to the page that they want to reference while they're working on a project or an experiment, and not have that page go to sleep before their eyes. If anyone's ever tried to follow a recipe using their tablet device, you know exactly what I mean. It goes to sleep right when you're in the middle of mixing the eggs. So being able to turn to that page, being able to have that page sustain, being able to put various articles side by side on the table and look at them, and also not have to worry about providing any electricity or worrying about protecting the journal because it's too fragile a device. There are a lot of reasons why scientists working in the lab have reported that they prefer print. And then there's others, between access issues that different readers might report, the reliability, the insurance that they're going to still have this over time when they want it. So there are a number of different really compelling reasons why people are saying that they prefer the print. And one of the common threads that we've observed and why they want the print also has to do with the type of work the individual does. We see that where research-based individuals do have a preference for the digital products, the preference for print is certainly among the practicing professionals and in the education sector. And we think that the reason behind that is because professionals and educators are interested in discovering new information, new topics, things that they might not otherwise come across in their normal work, to be exposed to new ideas as the ideas are emerging in the world around them. And that's a very different kind of reading behavior than someone who is specifically focused on researching a particular topic. Certainly the researcher wants to be able to find information on a very specific topic and do that very quickly. So it has to do with a lot of different things why these readers are buying the print, between the way they experience it, the way they seek the information, the way they use the information. There's clearly benefits for these people in terms of the print product. So why do we still print journals? Well, the answers turn out to be pretty simple. We print journals because subscribers still want print editions. They're willing to pay for them. It reaches a large segment of the market that digital does not reach. There's additional information that we've come across where there's many indications that having a print edition certainly enhances a publication as well as a publisher's profile in the marketplace. It bolsters the brand and the prestige of the organization simply by the pure visibility of it and the the visibility of the print creates exposure in the community. We still print journals because print revenues fund future innovation. And perhaps the number one reason is the reason that we're all here today, is because innovations in print on demand now make print a sustainable option for publishers to continue to offer. So let's talk about how the dynamics have changed in the marketplace. Yes, the total volume of print and the number of copies that are being printed for any given title have definitely come down overall. In fact, what we see today is that the overwhelming majority of titles are being printed, but printed in short and ultra-short runs, whereas there's only a few titles that continue to be produced in the conventional larger run type of environments. And this is an important shift because it really causes us to realize that if we're going to continue to sustain and offer the full spectrum of titles, we have to now change our approach to how we manage those titles and produce them and distribute them so that we're addressing what is now the majority, the 94% of titles that are in the short run categories. So when we talk about the costs associated with doing this and how this has changed the landscape, this next screen shows a very, very simple view conceptually of the cost. And of course, there's two big categories, your fixed costs and your variable costs. Variable costs are the ones that I think everyone traditionally really focuses on. The consumable costs of ink and paper, finishing, distribution, those kinds of things. But today, no less and perhaps even more important are understanding the fixed costs, the costs that are the same irregardless of how many copies are produced. And that ranges from everything from how you're managing subscriptions and content, how you're planning your production, how you're processing your orders, working through the postal system, managing your tracking and reporting, organizing for backorder fulfillment and reprint requests, all those functions that need to be handled and managed whether you're printing 1 copy or 1,000 copies of a title. So today the picture looks a lot more like this. And I purposely indicated here that there are definitely times, and we've seen this, where the variable costs, if you add up the cost of all the ink and all the paper, it's actually less than what the total overhead fixed costs of delivering those titles in aggregate are. And here, keep in mind, I'm not talking about the cost of just one title alone, but you think about the full spectrum of what a publisher or an organization needs to do to support titles across multiple topics and multiple different titles. That's when it really starts to add up. So from our perspective, a sustainable print-on-demand solution really needs to be looking at two distinct and equally important elements and looking for solutions in both areas. Certainly, to control variable costs, you want to be looking and leveraging the really breakthrough technologies that are now available in digital printing. But you also have to be equally or even more focused on the business process management of the side of the equation. And if you're doing both of those things, I think you're going to be able to really find some significant results. So what makes up a good print-on-demand solution? Well, a good print-on-demand solution from our perspective is one that addresses some of the key issues and challenges that we're facing as an industry to keep those 94% of titles still in print so that they're available for the people who want them. So we need to be, a good solution is one that looks holistically at what does it take to keep print subscriptions financially viable for the publisher. How do you work through the process so that you're managing your unpredictable demand? How do you avoid accumulation of excess inventory, manage complex distribution environment requirements, and minimize your overall overhead costs? And there are a number of known solutions that are now available, each one addressing these different needs, everything from print optimization, leveraging, as I said, the state-of-the-art digital printing capabilities, deploying zero inventory solutions. One that I think is becoming increasingly better understood is the use of data-driven production and distribution methods where you're using the available data to really optimize what is printed and distributed even before you start the production process. And then, of course, with those things in place, there are tremendous opportunities for workflow automation that eliminate redundancies and create efficiencies up and down the pipeline. And for organizations that have gone through that process and addressed those categories of topics, what we've definitely seen is they are very much able to move from where they were on the left hand of the screen, where they were running at a loss for every copy that they sold, and move themselves into a position where they're now actually able to not only continue to offer the titles in print-on-demand form, but to earn a profit on it, and even to pursue new revenue opportunities that are created by having shifted the way they approach their print production and distribution. So again, keep in mind that there are some major technology breakthroughs in recent years that make this possible. One of the big ones, of course, is the introduction today of the high-speed inkjet digital web presses. These presses are capable of producing into the range of 175 million pages a month, which anyone who's been around digital printing for any period of time will know that's just an astronomical capability. These are digital presses that are now producing print volumes that used to only be attainable by offset presses, and that's really changed a lot. The other side of the coin, of course, when you have that kind of firepower, is to understand that it's the data that empowers the print-on-demand solution. The press alone is not the whole solution. If you are leveraging and managing the data and using it intelligently to drive what is output on that press, that's when you're able to achieve the whole solution. So just a very simple picture of what that looks like. You know, a traditional approach to print has always been, you know, print what's needed and then figure out after it comes off the back end of the press how to sort it, how to package it, and how to distribute it. And so you see things broken up in very distinct, almost siloed functional steps within the production environment. But a print-on-demand solution looks more like this, where you're making a lot of those production and distribution decisions at the database level before even beginning print, so things come off the back end of the press already optimized for how they're going to be finished, how they're going to be distributed. And you see real significant savings there. Then the last big component to keep in mind about the print-on-demand opportunities and the solutions that are out there are not only once you've managed and controlled your costs, there are also incredible growth opportunities that are available to publishers once they've gone down this path, put these solutions in place, learn to understand the new dynamics and technologies. And again, Stephen Smith at Wiley, I think he sees this in a recent interview that he gave, where he talks about the need for publishers to reduce their dependence on traditional one-to-many distribution models, and instead to develop new one-to-one or even one-to-few models that deliver customized and personalized experiences for their readers. And there is probably no technology better suited for that than the print-on-demand solutions that we're going to hear about throughout the rest of the day. My opinion that in the scholarly publishing space, one of the biggest opportunities to do that is definitely to begin to think about the huge population of professionals out there that we spoke about earlier, the ones who really are the avid consumers of print, and to recognize that if we offer solutions that really only focus on the needs of the research-based community and fail to address the needs of the professionals, then we are kind of overlooking a very big segment of our marketplace and a big segment of constituents that are valuable to us. So think about how you can offer new revenue opportunities, new services, new approaches, new mechanisms to support those people. And I think that not only will you put yourself on a path to reduce costs and make print sustainable, but you also will put yourself on a path by which you can advance and grow your organization, attract new readers, and attract new subscribers to your publications. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass the ball here now in a second. But again, I'm Paul Lucas with Sierra Corporation, and there's my contact information if any of you have any interest in learning more.
Okay. Thank you very much, Paul. If you have questions for Paul or our other two panelists this morning, please don't forget to chat those in, and we'll be handling those at the end. So following on Paul's presentation, we'll now look at, as I mentioned at the beginning, how does this look in the real world with a commercial publisher and also from the perspective of a society publisher. So our next presenter is Troy Otts. Troy is a graduate from Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, with a degree in graphic communications and design reproduction technology. He's worked for Sage Publications since 2000 and is currently the Director of Production Systems. In this role, he is the Head of Design, Manufacturing, and Editorial Services.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. I just wanted to start by first talking a little bit about the print-on-demand versus the traditional model. I mean, we talk a lot about the print-on-demand, but what are the advantages over the traditional model? For me, the POD model made a lot of sense when we thought that journal print subs were going out, that print was dead. The decline was so quick that there was no way to really predict our quantities, and it made a lot of sense to move right into a POD model. Now that we've seen that start to plateau off, and we do have a little more control over what our inventory looks like, what our actual quantities of our orders look like, does it still make sense? Just to talk a little bit about the traditional inventory model and why it works. For the most part, it's inexpensive. I mean, it's inexpensive to overprint copies. Once you're already up on the printing press and you're already running the copies, those extra copies are very inexpensive. For us, warehouse space is fairly inexpensive as well. We already have a large warehouse for our books. To store those journals, that extra journal inventory is not that expensive. The copies on hand, I mean, that's a big piece. Being able to, for your marketing department, to go down and grab copies whenever they need, convention copies, the flexibility of being able to grab whatever you want whenever you need it. And for the most part, it's reasonably easy to manage. So then why the POD cost, or why POD? What is the cost of it? And when you look at, like I mentioned, the cost of printing extras, we look at it as to print one extra copy is $1. It's $1 for each additional copy that we print once the job is already on press. And a POD copy is $4. We find that printers love POD. There's reason for that. It's 4 times the cost. And at 4 times the cost, why bother with the POD model? And it really comes down to that quantity versus unit cost, and that's the graph to the right. Is no matter how you look at it, as that quantity goes down, your unit cost is going to go up. I mean, in our case, it goes up 4 times the amount. But there is the other cost. There's the freeing up of the warehouse space. In the end, the warehouse does cost money. Space costs money. Eliminating shipping costs. We used to ship copies all the way back to our warehouse and then ship them back out. They now ship directly from the printer. Reduce waste. So waste reduces or even eliminates savings. So it's one thing to get that $1 a copy cost, but if you start throwing those away, if you throw half of those away, it goes up to $2. If you throw 4 times that, it goes up to that $4. So it's easy for that savings to go away. And then possibly with the POD model, you potentially have more control over it because you know exactly what you're printing. So what did we do? What did we do at Sage? We basically essentially moved from this to this. We moved from a warehouse at Sage with all of our journals inventory to a warehouse at our printers with our inventory. And our goal in doing this was to get the best of everything. So rather than just go straight into a POD model, we wanted to eliminate our warehouse requirement. We wanted to always have inventory. We wanted to eliminate or significantly reduce waste. And we wanted to do that and get the lowest possible unit cost and make it virtually invisible as possible to everyone. So how did we do it? We basically cherry-picked all the best parts. We looked at everything and cherry-picked. We completely eliminated our Sage warehouse for the journals. We moved our inventory management to our printers. We limited the life of a journal to 1 year. We moved to 0 overs for all digitally printed titles. So anything that was already on a digital press that was under, say, 300 copies moved to 0 inventory. And then we reduced all standard titles to micro inventory. Then we took the entire system and backed it up by a robust POD program. So a hybrid POD, basically it's micro inventory backed by a POD program. It's not zero inventory, but invisible inventory. Invisible to our external and internal customers. It becomes a balancing act between POD and inventory. As inventory goes down, POD costs go up, and reverse, as that inventory goes up, our POD costs go down. So just this little blurb at the bottom just shows an example of how our system works. You have 12 copies in the printer's inventory, and we get an order for 15 copies. 12 copies come from inventory, 3 copies are POD'd, an order of 15 copies goes out. That's invisible to anyone. It's invisible to the customer. It's invisible to our internal clients. They have no idea how many are in our inventory. So how does it work? How does it add up? And this example here is based on back issue orders for a journal for 28 copies. So in the traditional inventory model, you'd have 150 copies in stock, 28 copies were ordered, 150 copies at $1 is 150. It doesn't matter if 28 copies are ordered or 150 copies are ordered. Either way, we've already paid for that 150 copies. POD model, you have 0 copies in stock, 28 are ordered, 28 at $4, $112. So right off the bat, you can see there's a savings on that POD model from the traditional model. And then you look at what we've done with the micro inventory or the hybrid model, and you have 20 copies in stock. 28, an order for 28 copies comes in. We got 20 copies at $1, 8 copies at $4, and 20 plus 32 is $52. I mean, that's 65% savings over the traditional inventory model, 53% over the POD model. So just the impact on inventory and cost. In 2010, in order for us not to have to go back on press and have an expensive reprint, we would print enough. So on average, we'd print 150 copies on a title and zero POD. In 2013, just by adding that POD buffer and being able to have those ready to go, ready to POD, we're able to reduce our inventory, in this case, all the way down to 20. And on the right, it just shows what the impact of that has been on our unit cost. So you can see that continued to go down, and that will start to level out in 2013 now. Those initial costs were all the impact of changes in staff, the reduction of the warehouse, and now we'll see that start to plateau off into 2013, although now is where we'll start to really tweak the dials and adjust that and get that number even down further. So we'll continue to lower our inventory numbers and back that by that POD program. So it just changes to be a warehouse in that model. I mean, it is. It's more work than a traditional model. It's definitely more work than a traditional model, and it's more work than a POD model. In a way, I think the POD model is the easiest model. It's kind of a hands-off. Once it goes into a POD, the publisher, for us, we have nothing to do with it. An order comes in, an order is printed, an order mails out. In this hybrid model, it really takes understanding the return on investment. Is it worth it? We have enough titles. It is worth it. It is worth saving that $100 on that one order for 150 when you look at that across all of our titles. The other challenge is no physical copies to grab. This seemed like a small one going into this. It ended up being one of our biggest challenges. Marketing department was no longer able to go down to the warehouse and grab copies. They were no longer able to last-minute conventions grab convention copies, bulk them up with other orders, and send them out. It took a lot more planning. It took more planning on what copies they even needed to order ahead of time. And before we had, in the example before, 150 copies in the warehouse that they could take from. In a way, it actually was helpful, too, because it gave us a lot more control over what people were taking, what people were grabbing for conventions. Did they need that newest copy, or could they grab something that there was already inventory on? Now we have insights with them into seeing where there's inventory, so they're able to grab copies that do cost $1 and don't cost $4 a copy. And then it requires monitoring and adjustment. You have to get in there and tweak this thing and adjust your inventory versus your POD. So a low inventory cost is great, but not if the POD cost goes way up. And then obviously reporting from that to be able to see how you're doing month on month. You keep those copies. We keep our copies for a year. We may shorten that at some time here, but you have to let some time go by before you can really see how you're doing. And then this is kind of a small point, but the POD copies will not, the covers will not match the PMS. And as much as the technology has come along to improve digital printing is great, the color is great, it's not going to match PMS covers. So Pantones are a challenge, but that's happening regardless whether you go to a full POD program or, I mean, the only way to avoid that is having the large amounts of inventory, or to move to 4-color covers, which is what we've done. That's been our solution. We have been moving completely away from using any sort of Pantone colors, so that any reprint copy looks exactly the same as the initial print run. And then it's just finding the right solution. It's working with the printer, developing a model that works for your business. It's not a model that works for your printer's business. It's a model that works for your own specific business. And then report, track, adjust, and repeat. I mean, it's a constant looking at it to see where we can tweak the dials and continue to save money. And being flexible and making sure your printer's flexible. I mean, we change this thing, we adjust it constantly. And there's just the not having an all-or-nothing approach. I mean, we did the exact opposite of that. We cherry-picked all the best things. How do we do this whole POD program? I mean, printers were really pushing, POD is great, we should move all of our, get rid of inventory. But we weren't ready just to walk away from that low unit cost. So how do you cherry-pick all the best pieces? And the one-size-fits-all solution just does not work. I mean, there is no printer solution that's going to work for every company. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Troy. Moving on to our last presenter of the day, Terry Lewandowski. Terry is a Director of Journal Production and Composition Services at the American Chemical Society. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Mathematics from John Carroll University and a Master of Science in Computer Science from The Ohio State University. She worked in information technology for over 20 years for Chemical Abstract Service before moving to publishing in 2000.
Hello, thank you very much. And excuse me, I'm happy to be a part of this webinar today, but my first thing to say was to please excuse my voice and welcome to the change of seasons in Ohio. It's 60 today and it's going to be 20 on Thursday. I think Paul and Troy have done a great job of introducing you to the many pertinent concepts about print on demand, and it's my pleasure to describe to you the American Chemical Society's experience with moving to a print-on-demand environment. I'll talk a bit about our print program, the drivers that caused us to move to a print-on-demand program, flavors of print-on-demand, how our transition occurred, and the side effects that we have observed following a print-on-demand protocol. Certainly lowering our economic cost was an important part of wanting to move to print on demand. But we really did have a twofold purpose. We wanted a lower cost program and we wanted to have a greener print program. From an economic perspective, if we could lower our print costs, we could generate greater margins without affecting the price that we charged our customers. And lowering our print costs came in multiple flavors. We had lower costs from the printer because they were printing less. We had less staff time spent determining the number of copies to print each print run, less waste. We eliminated our pick and pack costs, and we eliminated the high cost for going back on press when the time you spent determining the number of copies to print in the first place was wrong. We were also happy to reduce our carbon footprint. Fewer natural resources were wasted making spare copies. We didn't need to have storage for the excess inventory, so heating and cooling and such of the buildings was not necessary. And when we do need to print additional copies, we do so when the printers are already active. The American Chemical Society treats all of our print as if it were print on demand. We changed our subscription fulfillment to POD, and that change was completely transparent to our customers. Files are created each week that identify the subscriber, their address, the title, and the count of each of the titles that they receive. These are sent directly to our printer on a predefined schedule. So staff no longer need to estimate the quantity of the copies that are needed for each title run. This used to be a quite a time-consuming process. They would consider the time of year, how far we were in the renewal cycle, the quantity that had been ordered, etc., to try and determine how many extra copies of a title to print, and then they would have those estimates approved by somebody else. Then each year there would be another exercise to determine how many of the copies that were in storage should be destroyed, and then you had to pay for those to be destroyed. Now, if we run into an issue where a customer tells us that their copy was not delivered, or they want to have extra copies of an older issue, that information is added to our files that we send to the printer each week, and they are automatically printed. Similarly, if somebody has a special request, it's no problem. We have also created a pub store that, well, actually our printer created it for us. So if someone wants to order a copy of one particular issue, they can click on a button on our website while looking at that issue, go to the pub site, and order the copy themselves. Pay for it with a credit card, the printer prints it and ships it to the customer. At the end of the month, we receive an accounting and our share of the profits. And this is certainly much easier and reduces a lot of staff time involved for those special requests. The transition happened to be very smooth for us. I think there was a lot of good planning both on the side of the printer and the side of our project team. Our organization is one that is very much data-driven in the first place, and we work to automate all processes where it's rational. So POD was a very good fit for us. Almost coincidentally, all of our titles are the same height and width. I'm sure that's a change we made decades ago to save money with our printer at that point in time. This enabled all of our titles to follow each other on the press without any setup changes, and that makes it easier for the printer. Our fulfillment database was easily modified to create the feeds that the printer required, and we already had electronic cover-to-cover files that we had created for each issue. So it was very straightforward to send those to the printer. We agreed to naming conventions for all of the pertinent data files. Through the testing, through the project, we verified the electronic issues would print correctly on our printer system. We tested all the feeds, ran the process from the beginning to end, checked out all the invoicing, reported on, agreed on the reporting that would be needed, and tested that. Again, sort of your standard software development project. The actual move into production happened at year-end. This was something that gave us a little concern. You know, you're doing it over the holidays when many of our weekly journal issues are on a slightly different schedule. You've got more staff out of the office. We were dealing with Ohio and New York, so you had weather to concern. Everything worked out very well. All of the titles for the first issue of the year were printed and shipped on time and without problems. The customer-driven online ordering that I described earlier, we started that in the second quarter of that same year. That was a completely new product for us. We had not had that available to our products in the past. So what have the side effects been? Well, we've really needed fewer replacement copies. I think I have to attribute this both to moving to the print-on-demand, which generated better processes and improved the distribution, and it also enabled us to put a higher awareness on our data files so that all of the customer information there was a higher intensity on keeping it up to date and keeping it accurate. Fewer back order copies were created because we only create those which we need when somebody actually says that they want to order one. Firm believer in fewer steps generate fewer errors. We also have the ability to have more efficient delivery. Because we group all of the information for our subscribers and send this weekly to the printer, they can collect all the issues of different titles that are to be delivered to the same location in a given time period and ship them together. We do this for some customers, but not for others. It is an optional thing, but again, it has enabled us to have greater savings. Really, I knew I was last, so I had the shorter presentation, and I thank you all for your attention, and we'll direct you back to the organizers for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. We do have a couple of questions. Paul, this one is for you. Can you give any examples of the one-to-few models?
Well, when we talk about one to few, what we see is that there are, within a population of subscribers, there are subsegments of people who have common interests in a particular topic. So I think some of the natural evolution for those types of opportunities that you might see in your own organization would evolve out of things like that you might already be doing, for example, with your author reprints program, where you're offering author reprints to specific individuals. Why not take that same concept, and now that you've got your content fully digitized and the ability to print on demand, why not think about offering anthologies or special editions using that very same content? And we definitely see that there is a groundswell out there for interest in that kind of a thing.
Okay, great.
Does that answer your question?
We do have a little bit of time for questions. Still have quite a bit of time actually for questions this morning, so please chat them in if you have some questions for our panelists. We have another question. This is for any of the panelists. How long does it generally take to plan, implement, and complete a transition from traditional to POD model? Troy, why don't we start with you? Terry, do you want to pick that one up?
Sure. I can't tell you typically how often, but the one project that we did where we moved our entire program, which is approximately 40 titles, we were able to move that in a 3 to 4 month project. And that included defining the files, setting them up, testing, etc.
Okay. Paul, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that it typically is about a 3 to 4 month process. And what's good about it is that it's really not constrained by the number of titles, because much of the decision making and planning, as we said before, happens on the data management side. Physical print production doesn't come until later, and when it does, it's done using the print-on-demand environment, so it's very efficient. So we've seen projects where clients will have 800 to 900 titles that are being transitioned in a 3 to 4 month period as well. So it's a very, very, very scalable approach to print on demand, which I think is part of why it's becoming increasingly popular and is a sustainable approach that's being used by so many people in the industry today.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, that was our experience as well. And the only difference with ours was determining when we wanted to, what inventory we wanted to shift. Since we were hanging on to that micro inventory, we had to determine how much we were going to send over. So there was a little more planning on that, and then when we were going to make the cutoff and destroying it. The actual transitioning over, yeah, it did not take much time at all, maybe a month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks for chatting your questions in. We got a few now we'll try to get through these. So Troy, another one for you. Do you price POD based on worst case scenarios in terms of number of pages and color? Is each issue priced differently?
Definitely, yeah, the color is a huge factor, and that's where that micro inventory really comes in too, is anything that has color in it will print a higher inventory, because still the POD cost on the color work is so expensive. So that $4 rate even, that's just an average, but definitely on the black and the white work.
Okay. Question for either Troy or Terry. Did you change your subscription pricing when you switched to the POD model?
This is Terry. No, we did not change that. That was part of the decision that helped enable us to keep print affordable for our customers, was to go to POD. It was approaching having the necessity to raise the prices, and so by going to POD, we were able to not have to do that. And I want to go back to your previous question, we had a little bit different approach in that we agreed with our printer to specific prices for additional copies based on averages, and we put those into our contract. So if a particular issue happens to have a lot of color or less color, we've already agreed to a price. So that helps everybody with planning.
Okay. A few more questions. this could go to either Troy or Terry. Were there any surprises you did not anticipate?
Well, for us, one of them is the one I mentioned, just about how used to people were going down to the warehouse and actually getting physical copies. To me, it was one of those things that we kind of overlooked. We just did not realize the impact of folks being able to grab what they need, and they were just so used to that environment. So that was a challenge, but we were able to work with our printers to add some systems in place where certain members within the company are able to very quickly go in and place orders and have copies directly sent to them. So that was probably our biggest challenge.
Terry, any surprises you ran into?
Ours would have been a positive surprise in that we went out on a limb when we went to this. I talked about being able to group the titles that you were going to send to a particular location and send them out at once. So we made the decision to attempt to implement that by doing shipping of titles all on a given day of the week. So all our titles are shipped out, say, on Friday rather than whenever they happen to be printed. And we received no complaints from our customers for that. That worked for them just as well. So it was an additional savings that was easy to implement because you had all of the information in data files.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Actually, if I just want to add one other comment, because Terry brings up
Sure.
a really good observation there, and I think important. And going back to what I was saying before about what's the reader profile, the subscriber profile for those who buy print. And one of the shifts that we've definitely seen in the marketplace is that the individual who's buying print is less and less likely today to consider the delivery of that print product as being urgent. The people who have an urgent need for the content are the ones who are definitely subscribing to the online and digital editions. So, and you have a lot of subscribers who will buy both. They will buy the digital subscription as well as the print subscription. In many cases, up to a third of subscribers or more, and some publishers have reported up to 60% of their subscribers buy both. And so when you start to realize that the print edition is not perceived as being urgently needed, you put yourself into that position that Terry just described, where you can actually really begin to plan your distribution as well and optimize how you make those deliveries and when you make them so that you really can reduce costs and do it on a very reliable and predictable basis, which again I think is a very big departure in thinking from what has historically been the conventional thought that once it's printed it has to be delivered as soon as possible. And when I say urgency here, I'm only talking about a matter of a difference of 2 or 3 days, not any more than that. But those 2 or 3 days of breathing room you may allow yourself can substantially reduce your distribution costs.
Okay, makes sense. Were the panelists able to work with their existing printers, or did they need to find new ones?
We worked with our existing printers.
And we had an option and chose based on an RFP to go with a different printer, but we could have done it with the same printer.
Okay. Paul, are there any models wherein readers are able to self-curate their own POD models? For instance, if a researcher or a professional wants a printed version of personally selected studies or articles they are interested in.
From a technical standpoint, that's available today. That's one of the things when we talk about what's the future growth opportunities for the industry. Those options, those capabilities are really inherent in the technology that's being used today to deliver print-on-demand solutions. I don't think that we are seeing them deployed or executed on a broad basis just yet, but I think in part we have to reach out to the marketing counterparts in the organizations and help them to understand what that market opportunity is, so that we put together a plan to promote it and offer it to the subscribers and customers. So I think you see it spotty, it's starting to emerge. It's definitely on the leading edge of the trend, but it is definitely no longer a technical constraint. The world is ready to do this.
Okay, for Troy and Terry, who does the customer service, the publisher or the printer?
We have, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Terry.
Okay. We have the customer service, excuse me, within our organization. So we handle it, but that staff have direct contacts with the printer so that if they cannot immediately answer the question, they can contact somebody at the printer. They also have an online connection to their systems so that they can see what the printer believes has happened.
Okay.
So and then for us, like I mentioned before in the presentation, that ours is it's pretty much invisible. So the orders would still come through to our customer service. Our customer doesn't know really whether we have inventory on the copy or whether we're PODing it. So an order comes in, those files, that order transfers to our printers and it prints whether we have inventory or it PODs, digital prints, and sends out.
Okay. To any of the panelists, one could argue that the decision to retain or in some cases return to the print edition of The Economist or Newsweek is a luxury model, is based more on the reading preferences of the European and Asian business markets. Keeping this in mind, is it even possible for the small society-based STM journal to develop a feasible hybrid POD model?
I would say the answer to that question, this is Paul, I would say the answer to that question is absolutely yes. I don't think that the trends that we're talking about are exclusive to any region of the world. I think that from what we've seen is that they're equally viable here in the United States as anywhere else.
Okay.
And I would say some of our titles have a very small print run, but the POD setup is what enables us to be able to deliver that to the customers that want it.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning from our standpoint, too, we had a number of titles that we moved to online only, and once we were able to put this POD program behind it, we quickly moved away from that. So they're basically online only titles with a print option, so everything can print now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Well, that's the last of our questions, and perfect timing. I'm going to hand it back over to Gerald for our wrap-up for this morning.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Great job leading us through that with our group of fine panelists, and I wanted to thank the panelists and our attendees for joining us today. You should also right now be seeing a screen for the next webinar, Beyond Counting Downloads, and we hope that if you've enjoyed today's webinar that you'll join us for that one coming up in April. So thank you again for attending. Please do take the time to respond to the webinar evaluation you will receive via email, and again, you'll also get the link to the rebroadcast recording of today's session. On the survey, your feedback again helps us continually improve this webinar program, and we look forward to that feedback. With that, our session is concluded. Everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers, and take care of all things you need to take care of.